There were a few comments, to say the least, that expressed disbelief that you could use concrete without water.
Wouldn't the concrete just set up by itself if it didn't need water?
To which we say, yes, that happens all the time. I'm assuming this is the foam post just by him whirling it around like a baton.
About what I would expect, honestly.
Today's video is brought to you by our good friends over at Nationwide Industries, the Fence Pros' #1 choice. And they are this Fence Pros' #1 choice for a couple reasons. One, we love using their Keystone Traverse latches. They're easy to install. You simply bolt them onto the post. No drilling for rods or cutting the rods required. It's a pretty straightforward installation process. We also love using their full line of galvanized hardware. It shows up quickly and reliably.
What is up, Fence fam? Recently, we put out a shorts video where I made a comment expressing the belief that you could set up concrete without using water, without pouring it on top or mixing it in even. There were a few comments, to say the least, that expressed disbelief that you could use concrete without water, that it would never set up and that it would just be left with powder. To which I thought, I specifically remember seeing several videos that would prove otherwise. So today, we went and found one. From SWI Fence, these guys are the leading authority of fence, not only in Wyoming, but generally everywhere in the United States. If you follow fencing, you know SWI Fence. A couple years ago, they did a video comparing the difference between foam, dry compaction, and wet set concrete. Today, we'll react to the dry set portion of this video just due to the overall length of the video. If you'd like to watch the video in its entirety without commentary and watch the full length portion of it, we will link that video in the description below. All right, so we're starting about a minute and a half in. They've explained so far that the holes are dug to a consistent depth, to a consistent width. Each hole is getting 4 bags of Sackcrete per hole, which is pretty consistent with how you would build a commercial fence. Residential fencing, usually you would use a little bit less. SWI is known for building a lot of commercial fence, so they tested it using their commercial practices. So 4 bags are getting ready to go in this post using compaction. They've poured in some concrete. What they're going to do is pour in the concrete, compact it with a tamper like what you see here, and then keep pouring and keep compacting until they're at the top.
There's no water in the hole whatsoever, so all we're just relying on the water that's already in the soil.
And that's the point, right? Is that's where people that have installed fences and use concrete in general in the ground understand that the concrete will draw water from the ground around it. Unless you're installing fence in a desert, there's going to be ground moisture that these concrete will absorb and use to harden. A few of the comments said something to the effect of,
Wouldn't the concrete just set up by itself if it didn't need water?
to which we say, yes, that happens all the time. We get rid of roughly 3% of the concrete that we bring in, that we store in bulk, due to it absorbing moisture in the air. And a lot of these bags have a small plastic lining, but if that lining gets ripped, it will absorb just moisture from the humidity in the air and harden. It'll set off early. So the idea is here that it will absorb the moisture from the ground around it, much in the same way a tree does in order to set up.
Okay, so we got 6.5, which would be 3 1/4.
All right, so the posts are installed and compacted. Now they go on to do their foam example. If you'd like to watch the foam, you absolutely should watch it. We're going to fast forward to when they actually bring out the post. Now they're using an excavator. They explain that the excavator, so that when they pull the post, they're not damaging the concrete. They want to see what the concrete would look like in the ground.
Press it hard.
I'm assuming this is the foam post just by him whirling it around like a baton.
That was some hard ground. Yeah, it's frozen. So foam, dry pack, and wet set. Is there going to be any difference? Now, I did notice when we did the dry pack that it seemed like all the Portland was going up to the surface. Yeah, it could be, and the way we're going to know that, we're going to break it off, is to break it open.
That was another comment people made, was that if it may absorb the moisture around it, it would create a hard crust that would harden first, leaving powdery residue inside. It wouldn't be consistently mixed or consistently set throughout the entire pour.
About what I would expect, honestly. So you can see it just looks more granulated. I would not call it soft. I've seen softer concrete. I think that I think the way to get even worse concrete than that, if you mix it too wet, I think you could get weaker concrete than this. It was frozen to about right here. That ground was frozen. So we'll see if the bottom half comes off easier. I don't think it's gonna. There we go, it just cracked it. So I didn't notice any difference between the top and the bottom.
I mean, it looks consistently set inside to outside and top to bottom. When this concrete's drawing water in, it's going to draw it in completely, and it's going to set completely as illustrated here.
I noticed a hollow sound, kind of like it wasn't like solid, it wasn't ringing. It's not as firm, it's not as solid, and definitely not as high as PSI.
Another comment that came up was that even if it had set up, even if it had hardened, that it would be significantly weaker than wet set, which is probably true. We haven't tested the PSI of the concrete, mainly because typically these fences, when they fail at ground level, and it's the post itself that fails when properly set. We're not talking about people that only set a foot down or that set with 40 pounds of concrete. If the post is set correctly, the post will bend or break at grade. The post is going to break at a far lower PSI threshold than concrete ever would.
Probably if we took these down to a lab and we had them do a compression test on it, we'd probably find that the yield strength is much lower than this. So when you mix the concrete right, you get a higher yield strength. It's much like driving a post in the ground. Once you get past about here, if the grade's up here, about a foot down, no matter how much that post shakes, the bottom really isn't seeing a whole lot of action. While this isn't going to be sidewalk grade or driveway grade concrete, what it's doing is it's getting hard enough to actually bond to the post and hold the post where it needs to be. Ultimately, is it getting harder than the ground around it? I would have to say yes. If we drove this post in ground this hard, it would be in there very, very solid. It's not like this stuff's just completely crumbling. It's not super strong, but it's definitely stronger than that ground that we put it in. The only thing you don't know is what it's going to be like 10 or 15 years from now. This is probably going to degrade and crumble and deteriorate faster over time, but chances are you're going to be replacing the fence before that anyhow. So
Mark then goes on to test the wet set concrete that performs the best, as it probably should, and the foam, which you can make your guesses on how the foam performed. Like I said, if you'd like to watch the entire video to see the procedure in which they set them and the results of all three, we'll link that video in the description below. To the question of, can concrete, when installed in the ground, set without adding water? I think this is a fairly definitive yes, so long as it's not being installed in the desert. For now, Joe Everest, the fence expert, reminding you that good fences make good neighbors, and I'll catch you next time.